Okay, well, we can get started. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm thrilled to introduce our speakers and dive into an exciting session on maximising the benefits of Discover and Share in Power Maths. Just before we begin, I want to highlight a few housekeeping points. So, number one, we are recording this webinar. For those of you who are currently Power Maths users, the session will be available on ALP in the classroom support area. If you're not currently a Power Maths user, you will receive a link to the YouTube recording following the session. So please feel free to revisit it or share it with your colleagues afterwards. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A function instead of the chat box. This helps us track your queries and ensure we get back to you. At the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A with our presenters. So without further ado, let me introduce our lovely presenters. First up, we have Tony, the series editor for Power Maths and founder of White Rose Maths. And joining him is Josh, our lead author for the Power Maths content. So Tony and Josh, over to you.
Thank you, Tara, and good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to be here today. So this is the first in a series of webinars that Josh and I are doing around focusing on really going a bit more in depth into each of the sections. The key parts of today are hopefully to try and just talk very briefly about the purpose that Josh and I set out when we thought about when we started really writing Power Maths. Secondly, a bit of the theory behind that and what's supporting it. Then some practical suggestions that we've learned from visiting many schools and talking to many schools about how they're using Power Maths. And finally, Josh will give you some walkthroughs of certain lessons, which giving you a bit of context on how maybe you could apply some of what we're talking about today and bring it to life. So that's the purpose of today's session. That's what we're going to go through. So why did we originally write the Discover and Share section? So firstly, it was to provide that stimulus to generate classroom discussion. So there was a nice image, okay, that you could really generate curiosity with, okay, try and get children in the classroom involved in a task that they might see in real life around them, in school, at home, etc., etc. So it was to provide a context which the maths could be built into rather than just a bit of an abstract question. So that was the purpose of Discover and Share. You should notice if you work, depending on how much you've used Power Maths, whether you're new to it, whether you've not seen it, you're just evaluating it, whatever it is, you should see that there is a vast range of Discover tasks, activities, settings, scenarios that cover a broad range of things. So hopefully we've tried to give you ideas and things that should generate that curiosity, provide a stimulus, and also some sort of real life mathematical context, which you can bring to life in a classroom. So that was ultimately the purpose of what we were trying to do in the first with those Discover images. Then what theory did we try and use to try and bring to apply then when you're bringing this to life in a classroom? So firstly, we anticipated that this would be a bit more of a slightly collaborative effort, okay? Collaborative with between children, so pair work, small group work, tables, etc., or collaborative with a teacher as well. So this idea is that there should be enough to get children into the task to make sure they understand it and then have a go themselves using manipulatives. You'll notice that throughout both the Discover and Share, it's full of that concrete pictorial abstract. We're trying to give children and teachers the representations to use. And you'll notice there's a lot of this idea of metacognition and reflection built in to what's been said, to the questions and everything else that we do. But the whole idea of the theory is of these principles. Then you've got growth mindset through what the characters are doing, through what the characters are saying, and lots of opportunities as well for mathematical talk. And I've already touched on curiosity. So those are all elements of theory that we try to bring into the first Discover and Bits of Share section as well. All these things really were key elements in terms of the theory that we looked at to bring this to life. Then, in terms of more practically though, what does that theory mean in practice? What do we see? So firstly, ensure that the whole class understand the question. I think that's really what sometimes you notice is that the teacher will just say, right, have you go at the question, And that doesn't always work if the class don't really understand the question. Josh will talk about this in more detail when he goes through a lesson, but the idea is before you get into 1A and 1B, make sure they understand the context, make sure they understand the things that are going around them. Encourage children to support one another where possible. So rather than it just being one child answers it, okay, try and encourage that supporting in one another. If you attended Josh and my webinar that we did on oracy, again, this was a big part of that oracy webinar. We know that things like think, pair, share, okay, using mini whiteboards to share ideas make a big difference. So encourage you into putting into practice. It's not just about individual children answering it themselves. There is a bit more of a tiny bit more of a collaboration. Have equipment ready to use, again, where it works best in the classrooms, where we're seeing it best. If we're using manipulators, let's say we're making 32 out of base 10 equipment, or they need 32 in base 10 equipment, rather than giving them lots of base 10 equipment, give them what they need, okay, unless the task is to select 32 in base 10. But if they're using 32 in base 10, then I'd encourage you to just give them the equipment they need, which cuts down, it makes it just a bit more efficient. Clearly, as a classroom teacher, so in this example here, working out Mr. Lopez's number, okay, going around supporting children as necessary is something that we'd encourage you to do. So the task being set, okay, very quick task, and then just going around surveying how they're doing. And using STEM centre, we've provided STEM centres in places also in the teaching guide to support that. And again, Josh will talk more about this when he goes through a bit more of lesson by lesson. I think if you joined on the oracy webinar, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of mini whiteboards as a tool to support learning, to support teaching. And the power of the mini whiteboard is that it encourages that participation. There are still schools who don't use them often enough, or just use them as a single answer tool. That's fine. But also the mini whiteboard allows that more children to get down there thinking a lot more. So rather than just an answer, what thinking are they doing? Because often the tasks that we're saying in the Discover tasks are not just about an answer. We don't just want the answer, we want to know how they got it. So that mini whiteboard tool allows them individually, and then comparing to one another, how the process that they got through, and they can talk about it. Allows you then as a teacher to go around and look at the feedback. Okay, immediately you can see, oh, they're on the right path, they're not on the right path, etc. So it gives you that immediate feedback and assessment. I've just talked about it facilitating group work and collaboration amongst children, and it provides that opportunity to be flexible and also be reflective. So if you've got those boards, you can, in the share section, or you can talk about certain answers that children have got. I would absolutely always encourage as much use of this mini whiteboard tool as something to use to record thinking that's going on, rather than just answers. So that's the mini whiteboard. I just wanted to focus on it a bit more. Things that we know, Josh and I, we put our heads together, things that we feel that really make a difference that we see. So firstly, make sure you give enough thinking time for some of these problems. I think sometimes when you go into schools and you see Discover being done, the teacher almost just tells them the answer, which I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm not saying it's right, but what I feel you need to do is make sure children do have the thinking time. Even if you're not doing a bit more collaborative or working together, it's still important to make sure they understand the problem and they've got a bit of time to think about it themselves. So make sure we give that thinking time. The other reason why the collaboration and the thinking time works is it encourages that different multiple strategies. Most of the activities that we do have different ways that children may solve a problem, or different approaches, and maybe misconceptions that come up through those approaches. So we encourage that multiple strategies to solve a problem. So that all these things make a difference. Giving some thought at the start of a lesson before you go in to support those children who are struggling. Okay, so how can you support those children? The teacher guide, notes online on Active Learn, and also in the teacher guides as well, provide some advice on what to do with those that are struggling. And again, Josh will talk a bit about that when he goes through certain lessons, and also the teacher guide and notes give massive guidance on support, step-by-step questions that you might want to ask on particular questions, how to approach it. So I'm not saying you have to read it in depth before the lesson, but do have a look at those notes because they are there to support ideas and guidance to bring it a bit more to life. So those are things that I think make a difference. And finally, for me, one of the biggest things that where Discover's done well compared to other places and Share is where there's that real clarity of explanation, ensuring that it's efficient, ensuring that it's clear, ensuring that all children get and can follow the steps. Really, that's where you want to get by the end of it. So that's Discover theory. I'll just talk a tiny bit about Share. So Share is designed to be a bit more teacher-led. So children have just they've had a go at some of the problems. They've helped each other. The teachers supported those who need a bit of support. They've all had a chance to think about the problem. The Share section is a bit more teacher-led. This is where, you know, I've looked at what children have done. I've looked at their answers. I now want to take some of those answers, take some of the problems, take some of the solutions, and I want to bring them to life and bring them to the front to share with the class. So this is much more teacher-led, right? The Share section has got those images and representations to support the understanding. So there should be very, very little in Share that's not backed up with something that helps understanding. Hopefully you've seen that. It should be modeled as precisely as we'd expect it to be modeled by the teacher. So use that. Use the way it's structured to provide a bit of the modeling, what the characters are saying, help with the modeling as well, help with the metacognition, what are the process they're doing, etc. The characters also help with that growth mindset. Oh, I didn't get that first time. It doesn't matter. Can have a go next time, etc. And finally, the Share has also got misconceptions. We've tried to pull out in Share some common misconceptions that you might want to discuss with your class as well. So the idea of Share is very much to sum up what we've just just gone through in the Discover section. So we've done the Discover section, and the Share, the best shares is where you're summing up everything that the children have come across, that have learned in the Share section, but you're summing up with the whole class. So where's it done best? Put it into practice. So most of this I've just said, but children share the responses which they rehearse. And I think it's really important that children share their responses. Again, I go back to that oracy webinar that we did just before Christmas. I think it's really important that they either come up to the board or they talk out loud. And again, those mini whiteboards support that. They're a tool where they can rehearse what they want to say before. It's an opportunity to look at different ways of solving problems. So this one child's done it this way, another child's done it this way. You're going to get a deeper understanding if you look to compare those problems, or children look to explore maybe different ways. Is there a better way, or are both ways the same? Whatever it is, look at different ways of solving the problems, pulling out misconceptions. Make sure that you're very explicit with the modeling. Make it very clear step by step. One of the things that where it doesn't go well, where I think sometimes not enough time is given to this is, here's an example where you on the right hand side where you're seeing 3 10s and 2 1s, 1 10 and 2 1s in each column. Don't assume that children know that straight. Oh, you can just see it. Make sure, spend a bit of time, slow it down. Can you see the 3? Can you see 3 lots of 12, for example? Can you see where the 12? Everybody point to the 12. Make sure that everybody can see that, and we don't just make any assumptions. And that was one of the biggest things that we learned in the early math sub days, is that from the higher performing jurisdictions, is they'd left nothing to chance. They made sure that every single child could see 1 10 and 2 1s, and they saw 1 10 and 2 1s 3 times, and everybody could see it because they knew that spending that bit of time there was massively invested then further on, because it's amazing how children don't always see that. So make that modeling absolutely explicit. Use the characters to highlight key points and any misconceptions. And this provides also you an opportunity to model the thinking out loud to support that understanding. The characters help that, but again, some of the language that I use about 1 10 2 1s, okay, pointing to the 1 10 2 1s, this is the language that you want children to use. And I think that's your opportunity as a teacher, to be precisely modeling that language as much as you can. And again, the notes and guidance around it in the teacher guide and on the page should help support that. We've tried to make Share, certainly in the second edition, as clear as possible. So there aren't as many methods as we used to have. So some of those have gone into the teacher guide, if you want to, but we've tried to make the most common methods, the most ones are likely to see into the share section. And then I just wanted to pick up on two ideas. For those who've heard me do this bits on this webinar before, there's a couple ideas that you do see, and I do think, well, I think, again, both of these support oracy as well on the last webinar that we did. But one of the things that we picked this up from China, but it's when we went out to China, but it's not just used there, it's used throughout, is this idea of use the children as little teachers, use them to support one another, and use them to come to the board to share their answer. I think there's nothing more powerful than a child. I think it helps develops a child's confidence with maths as well. So don't be frightened of doing that, but do that as an activity on a bit more of a regular basis. Get the child out front to try and explain it. And then the other one, I went into a school a couple of years ago now, in fact, just before COVID, where they where every single child had a name badge and it were their method, and then they compare methods, and then we'd use Ben's method or Lamar's whoever it is method to help us solve this problem. And I really like that, and they were used to doing that every single lesson. So just a couple ideas of what I've seen and Josh has seen, bringing things to life. But Josh will be able to talk more about this in a second, because I believe I'm going to hand over to him now. Josh, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to you.
Thanks, Tony. That's really interesting to hear those back and to remember what it was, some of those discussions we had right in the early days when we were putting it all together. That's great. I'm just going to try and follow on from what Tony was talking about. I've picked out some specific lessons, not totally at random, but I'm not just cherry picking a few lessons where I think it's applicable. More or less, I think, or what I'm going to talk about now could be applicable to any single lesson that you happen to be working on. And I'm going to try and look at it from the angle of what decisions does Power Maths allow a teacher to make, or what opportunities are there for making different decisions when you want to teach your class. We're always aware that we wrote Power Maths based on experience, years and years of experience of teaching children, years and years of trying out different concepts, or having lessons that didn't go so well, having lessons that went well in one part but didn't work for some students. Anyway, so they are written based on experience and based on real life practice, but also what we happen to write might not on a certain day be exactly what you think, oh, I need to go exactly down this path for my class. So there are, Power Maths can be used really, really flexibly, and hopefully what I can indicate through some of it will give an insight into that. I just wanted to start with, I've picked out a Discover task from, I'm going to share it now, so hopefully you'll be able to see my screen in a moment. Bear with me while here we go. So hopefully you can see there, I've picked out a Discover task, and I've just isolated the Discover task away from any of the questions. I'll just give you a moment to absorb that. The first thing I'm thinking about is, I wonder if all of my class know what a coconut shy is, and if they've been to a fairground, have they had a go at a coconut shy? Have they had a go at a game where you throw and try and knock them down, and you get a score of, do you knock them down? Why is it hard? Why isn't it effective? Anyway, so my first thought is, do my class have the kind of contextual knowledge and experience they need to be able to access this? And I might be thinking to myself, do you know what? I'm going to guess that I've got this lad in my class, and I think he's not going to know what it means, and he's going to get confused, and he might have some anxiety about not understanding the picture. So the first option I might have is to do some pre-teaching with one or two pupils and just say, look, later on in this lesson today, the first thing we're going to see is this picture of, and it's going to say coconut shy. Should we have a look at this picture together? Okay, look, let's have a look at this picture. Can you see that? Do you know what? Have you seen I mean, ideally, I'd bring a coconut in with me. I don't have any to hand at the moment, but anyway, I could do some pre-teaching. The idea being that I've already thought about a child in my class that might find it a bit disengaging because he might not have the background or the experience he knows to be able to understand what's going on. So I could say, look, we'll talk about this picture. Can you see this picture? The game is you throw at these coconuts and you're trying to knock them down. And so we're going to be talking about that in our lesson today. And some of the children in the class might not know what a coconut shy is. So I'm going to tell you. So then, and then in my head, I know at the start of the lesson, the first question I'm going to ask is, let's say it's Michael. I'll say to Michael, Michael, this is a coconut shy. I don't know if all the class know about this. Can you just and we could have a conversation in front of the class. And what I'm doing is I know that I've just from looking at it beforehand and having that conversation, I've already drawn a potentially disengaged pupil into the lesson, giving them a sense of self-esteem, giving them a sense of leading the lesson, and you have to manage it sensitively, but that's an option. The second thing I wanted to mention about this lesson is that it's lesson 4 of a percentages unit. And it's been written really because as a teacher, I know that we teach percentages, we teach what you have to do, you divide by 100, you multiply by however, or 10% is divided by 10. But actually, why do we have percentages at all? And one of the main ideas behind why we have percentages is so that, because sometimes 6 out of 20 and 7 out of 25, it's not immediately obvious which one of those two is the better score. And percentages is a tool that really allows us to compare fractions, to compare proportions, to compare these concepts. So actually, I will point out that the questions haven't been written in a throwaway style. This has been really carefully thought about, and 6 out of 20, 7 out of 25, and I might say to the whole class then, so this is the game, you understand the game, let's have a look. So we've got Lee and Kate. Lee scored 6 out of 20, Kate scored 7 out of 25. What do you think that means? The out of language. And, they might be able to talk about that. They might be able to talk about penalties, or they might be able to talk about how many 3 out of a group of 5 friends or something like that. Anyway, we can talk about the language, and we can say, do you know what? We've been talking about percentages. I wonder what this question's going to be about. And we can just gradually involve ourselves in the context. What I know as a teacher, I want to get out of the lesson is, as well as them being able to be more proficient at percentages, I also want them to experience that, oh, this is what percentages are. It's because it's a really good way of comparing quantities and proportions of a quantity. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So before I've even shown the questions, we've done some orientation into the problem. But as a teacher, I've also looked at it and thought, why has the author written this like this? Why is it 6 out of 20 and 7 out of 25? Is it just randomly chosen because they want more practice? Or is there something deeper going on here? And so I just wanted to highlight that before I share my PowerPoint. I think that that's, even before I've started as a teacher, if I've just looked at the Discover, thought really carefully about what I want to get out of the lesson, then a lot of the decisions I have to make as a teacher just fall into place as a result of that. Anyway, then I'm going to share my PowerPoint. For the next one, what I've done is I've picked out a few Discover and shares from double page spreads from a couple of different lessons across different year groups, and thought about some of the everyday decisions I might make, the ones that almost become a habit, and then some of the ones where it might be a bit more a quirky decision that might happen once a week or once every couple of weeks, or rarely, or how I would bring some of my own personality into the teaching. So, and I think that Power Maths gives us that opportunity to make some of those decisions. So you should be able to see now my screen says teacher decisions. So if you just bear with me, what I'm going to do is I'll turn the page so that you can see the Discover and Share, and I'll let you, before I start talking, I'll just let you absorb what's on there. Now, from a teacher point of view, my first thought is to look at that and say, okay, right, what's this really, really getting at here, and how is it building on what we've done previously? So actually, I'm looking at the share here, and what's drawing my eye is that we're using this, when we're thinking about division, we're using this share model rather than the grouping model of division. So I can see that here, for example, 85 divided by 4, that means shared into 4 equal groups. 57 divided by 5 in this is shared into 5 equal groups. And I'm just keeping that in my mind, rather than, I'm not saying how many 5s are there in 57. or how many 4s are there in 85. I'm saying 85 shared into 4 equal groups. Just going to keep that in my mind. The second thing I'm going to notice is that this share page is using base 10 equipment. And so I'm going to think, right, okay, for this lesson, I'm going to have base 10 equipment on the tables before we start the lesson, or they're certainly going to have access to it because that's what I'm going to be using with the students to go through some of this. So in my head, once I'm clear on that, and I can see, right, okay, so today's lesson is about looking for remainders. I've picked this one because I think it's just a typical lesson. It's not doing anything out of the ordinary. Mr. Jones is one of my favorite teachers in the series. He's such a calm teacher. I find him very soothing to be around. He's teaching the class here, and so what the Discover here is doing is simply putting a context maths questions in a maths class. We've got Zach, Jamie, and Emma, and they are experiencing just what the students in my own class are experiencing. They're in the lesson, they're doing some thinking. They might be struggling with it. They might have their own ideas, but they're there. It's not some difficult problem where we've contrived some word problem it's just here are the questions on the board and they've got to do some thinking. So I think this is just a classic typical lesson. What I'm looking at here is how am I gonna get my students to do some real thinking about it. The first thing I might do is I might isolate the Discover picture. So rather than show the whole thing all at once, like I did with the previous one, I'd probably just show the Discover picture. Mr. Jones is saying something to the children. He's not even asked them the question yet. He's just describing, he's giving us a definition of what remainder is. And then I'd see that there are 6 calculations on the board. And I'm thinking to myself, have they been chosen at random or are they chosen for a particular reason? And what I'd like is that my class start to think about some of that for themselves. They have the habit of noticing and say, oh, look, even if they're noticing something like that says 77 divided by 7. That's a nice pattern. I like that one. And then they might even have something going off in their head saying, oh, that's like the 11 times table. And that's a really useful thought that it's sparking some link of knowledge from somewhere before. Another one they might look at is they might look at the 48 divided by 2 and say, divided by 2, I know that. That's like halving. Just some of them might not do, but I'm just giving them the space to notice that. Before I've even asked them the question, I'm hoping they're going to start to do some noticing. When we had some teachers from Shanghai come to work with schools over here, in fact, they said the skill they want the children to use first in every lesson is the skill of noticing. So in this lesson, there's already things to notice. They may or may not be relevant, but it's there. It just looks like a typical humdrum. Someone's written some numbers on the board, but actually there's already something to notice. Then what I might do is I might spend some time. Oh, look, Mr. Jones is saying something about remainder here. Let's have a discussion as a class. Talk to your partner about, we could have some oracy techniques come in here where talk to your partner about what remainder means. Do you think that's a good definition? Would you change his definition? How would you explain that to a younger year group? All of those sort of oracy opportunities are in there. Next, once I'm sure that the children have understood that word says remainder and that they remember learning about remainders in previous years, we then might look at 1A and it says, well, work out 39 divided by 3. Does this calculation have a remainder? As a teacher, actually, what I want my children to say first of all is, let's play a guessing game. Who thinks there's going to be a remainder? Who thinks there's not going to be a remainder? Who's not guessing but actually got some thought about why it might be? If you have, let's just or write it down on a little bit of paper. We'll come back to that later and we'll do some. We're just doing some metacognition there. We're just doing some work with getting them to predict how their brain works. 1A, work out 39 divided by 3. Now, the question doesn't say use base 10 equipment. The question doesn't say use bus stop. The question doesn't say use a part whole model or a share model. It just says work out 39 divided by 3. As a teacher, I might say, oh, you know what? I'd like you to work it out, but I'd also then like you and your partner to work together to use the base 10 to show me how you think it works. Anyway, so then we can do that. We could then look at the share for 1A and look at the model and say, oh, does this match what you thought with your partner? Or so-and-so, I noticed that this happened on your table. Can you talk about, how does this picture work here? Is this picture like what you did with your equipment? One thing I think might be really useful is say, look, the share picture is static. It's just a picture. but actually there's some movement involved. And if they've got their base 10 on their table, we could make the 39 and then we could split it up. In fact, they could work in groups of 3 for this one. That would be ideal, wouldn't it? And they could move it and they could move it back to get. And we've got all of this opportunity for handling the hands-on resource in a way that brings it to life. There's no remainder here. Then we could go back to 1B. Which 2 calculations on the whiteboard have a remainder? And we can say, look, the author's been quite kind to us here, actually. They've told us that exactly 2 of these have a remainder. So we know we've got to look out for them. What do we know about remainders from previous years? Talk about it. Should we play our guessing game again? Do you notice any? And someone might say, I don't think 77 divided by 7 is a remainder because I remember my 11s or something like that. And we've got opportunities to start. You say, oh, great, thanks for that. That's a really good idea. And someone might say, oh, no, I think 69 divided by 3 does have a remainder because there's no 3s in 69. It's just a 6 and a 9. It hasn't got a 3. It would have to end in a 3. And I say, thanks, that's a really interesting idea. I'll write that down. We'll come back to that later. I wonder if it's true, then that's been really helpful. And if it's not true, it's been even more helpful because we can learn something from it. Just trying to prize opportunities for having an idea and making mistakes with it. Then we could go through, get them to work. This actually could be quite a lengthy task with them. It could be a 5-minute working together with the base 10, or perhaps some of them prefer to draw lines and dots, or some of them prefer to use different methods. But at the end of it, once they've had a go, then we can come back together as a class. And as a teacher, I've got the option, do I set them all off to check all 5 at once? Or do I keep them, look, everyone now check 85 divided by 4. And do I step them through it and say, okay, get 8 10s, get 5 1s. Okay, let's mark out 4 circles we're going to share them into. Anyway, I've got all of these options for even just a typical lesson. It's just about numbers. It's just about calculations. It's really focused on this concept of remainder. But just by looking at this, I've got so many different options for how I want to interact with my class, how I want to get them to use materials, how I want to structure the question and answer, whether I want them to get them to show me their methods first and then I show me my methods, or whether they've come up with a different method and we want to compare it with the share page, and so on and so on. There are all those micro options. What I want to avoid is just being in a, okay, now let's look at what it says on page 53. Okay, look, it says this. That's the right way. Now let's look at page 1B. It says this. It's all there on the page, but in fact, it gives us so many options for quite rich discussions and for quite meaningful tasks. It could be group work, pair work. It could be up at the front. It could be however we want to do that. Anyway, so that's just your typical normal lesson, but still lots of opportunities to bring it to life, to make it rich in thinking, in metacognition, in oracy, and all of those different options. So I just wanted to start with that, and I would strongly suggest that every single lesson has got all of those options built into it. Next, at the other end of the scale, I'm looking at this one. So I'll just let you absorb this again. Now, this lesson is not your typical number, place value, calculation lesson. It's about a specific objective in year 6 around the parts of a circle, naming the parts of a circle. And in fact, it's good. It's going to seem like, oh, it's a geometry. Oh, this is a geometry. It's got a picture of them outdoor in the playground, and then it's got a picture of compasses. It's got a picture of dots on the other side. I'm looking at that, and I know that lesson, the more I look at it, it's been written for the moment of surprise when you get 3 children standing 5 meters from Emilio, they've made a triangle. You get 4 children, they've made a square. But actually, the more and more children you add to it, as the shape changes, if you do that right, before you know it, you get a circle. And actually, what I know is that there's a moment of surprise or realization that a lot of pupils will go through if we act this out. So perhaps before this lesson even starts, we go to the hall and we put a cone in the center of the hall, and I say we're going to play a game, and the game is I'm going to say your name, and then you have to go and stand exactly 5 meters away from that cone, and then gradually we do that, and I'm going to say, and what I want you to think about is what shape are we making. And so I could do this in the playground. I could do this in the school hall. We could use cones. We could say, And I know that this has been written with that idea in mind, that this could be a really interesting practical activity that really comes alive if we do this for real. So I've got a decision to make. Do I want my class to look at this picture first on the screen and then say, do you know what? Why don't we do this together outside? Why don't we all go outside and do this together? And then the class will do their, yeah, let's go outside. And you've got the theatre of it. Yeah, let's go. And they feel like, yeah, we're doing something fine. We're not doing sums. We're going to go outside. And yes, it's fun and it's practical. But I know that I've got 3 or 4 children in my head that are they're going to find that transition really difficult, and they're going to forget that they're actually doing maths. All they're going to think about is, can I stand next to my friend? What can I say? Or, oh, look at that! Look at that over there. I thought that was where I saw an owl the other day over there with Anyway, so what I want to do is curate this a bit with my class. I want that moment of surprise, but I also want them to really focus on the maths. So another decision I've got is that perhaps I could do this at their desks first. And before I even show them this, we're going to play a game with, I'm going to say, I want you to draw a dot, and then I'm going to get you to do a ruler, and I want you to draw a dot 5 centimeters away from it, and another one 5 centimeters away, and another one 5 centimeters away. What shape have you made? And another one 5 centimeters away. What shape have you made now? And another one 5. What shape have you made now? Look at your partner. Have they made a mistake? Have they measured any wrong? What shape have you made now? And then actually, the more they do it on their piece of paper, I've made a circle. I've made a circle too. No, it's not a circle. It's a dodecagon, or and you can have all of those discuss. And then the excitement is built around doing the drawing and doing the measuring really accurately. And then I say, what? You made a circle? I didn't ask anyone to draw a circle. I just asked you to do 5 centimeter measurements. And then they say, no, that can't be right. We're going to go outside. We're going to go outside and do it differently. And then we do the circle. And then we come back and we look at this. And then we look at the share and we say, do you know what? Actually, all the time, what we've been learning about as a circle is exactly this. It's all of the points the same distance away from a center. And then we can go into the lesson. And then I can let's look at the share page. Let's do that. Oh, and then I like this. Down here, Sparks is saying circles with the same center are called concentric circles. And I'm just going to rejoice in teaching them a cool word, concentric. I'm fairly certain they don't know it. We're going to learn that. We're going to learn what it means. And when Gran picks you up from school today and she says, what did you do at school? I don't want you to shrug your shoulders and say, I don't know. I want you to say, we learned concentric circles, Gran. And she's going to be proud of you. Anyway, so there's that option with that one. I can start on a piece of paper. We can go outside. We can come back. But actually, I know that the learning is not what they do outside on the playground. The learning is not what's on the page. The learning is them thinking about how they're all linked together. So there's that option there. I could do a more active lesson. I can take the Discover and turn it into something. Other things I need to think about. So here's another one. Subtract fractions within one. I've got a dumper truck, a delivery, 1/2 ton of sand. I only need 3/10 of a ton. Please take the rest away. And I'm saying to myself, right, okay, do I need to do some maths beforehand here? Because some of my class might not know what a ton is, or they might have heard the word, but when we say a ton, it just means loads. So, oh, I've got a ton of marking to do, class. I'm so upset. A ton of marking that's incredible. A whole ton of marking. Anyway, we could have that discussion and have some fun with the language. And I could do that. I could do that at the start of the day, away from the maths lesson, so that it's not part of what I'm going to actually be, so that there's not distractors. So if my school is really concerned about cognitive load or distractors, then I do that at the start of the day, right before we even start the register. I say, oh, I am so tired. I did a ton of washing last night, and I'm never going to get. Anyway, you get the picture, right? And then once I know that they've understood ton, then we can have some discussion. The option is, do I say to my class, a ton is actually 1,000 kilograms? Or do I just say it's a measure of weight? It's quite a heavy weight, about the weight of 2 cars. Do I say that? Because if I say it's 1,000 kilograms, that might help them. Oh, so 1/2 ton is 500 kilograms. That might give them another route into solving the problem that I do or don't want them to use. So I will say that, again, they've been chosen carefully so that there's lots of options here. The share, I quite like 1A. So Tony talked about earlier when we redid the White Rose Maths edition of Power Maths, we made some changes. One of the changes we made was we made the flow of 1A through to 1B a more progressive flow. Originally, 1B was just an extra question that asked something different about the picture, but now there's a flow. And you can really see the flow here. So 1A, draw and shade a diagram to show 1/2, convert your diagram to show half as tenths. Now, that's accessible to my class if I know my class, and I know this is in year 5 from memory, and I know they can do that. But it's taking them through a flow of it, and the share has got one example of that. They might have done something different, and that's fine. And then 1B goes into, well, 1/2 subtract 3/10. Because of what I've done in the flow, that allows them to think actually, and the answer comes out from it. So actually what I've been doing is we've been doing this worked example, but it's gone through the stages of 1A and then through to 1B. I will also, when to have fun, I was thinking like, probably I know I'm in year 5, but in the early years classroom, they've got some dumper trucks and they've got some sand. And my year 5 class would be happy to suspend disbelief if I brought it in making a beep, 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 beep sound and then dumped it onto my desk. I think they would find that amusing, and it would bring just a little bit of joy into the day. And yep, it might distract some of them from what's going on, but on the other hand, it might engage them in what we're doing. And might just be the little spark that we need to invigorate a sequence of lessons about fractions where we've got the dumper truck. They're year 5 children. They're happy to suspend disbelief and do something that feels like play and fun just for a moment. On that note, here's a year 2 lesson. What we're trying to do in this lesson is get children to think about edges of 3D shapes. Now, it was Tony that gave the original idea for this lesson, and he said what he'd seen where if you make these models, the skeleton models of a 3D shape, and then dunk it in bubble mixture, when you pull it out, they make these cool kind of tesseract shapes where the bubble mixture they join together and they make these really interesting patterns. And you can see there Bob has done that. Molly's dunked hers in, but Bob's taken his out, and the bubble mixture has worked like that. And actually, why not have some fun? I mean, like on the page, it's there, it's telling a story, but you'd say, no, let's do this. We're going to get here's some bubble mixture, here's some straws. Actually, I don't want you to just think I was doing messy play with bubble mixture though. What I do want you to do is let's make some shapes, and right at the end of the lesson, right at the plenary, when you've all concentrated really, really hard on your work, now we've understood about edges, in our plenary, we're going to dunk some of them, and we're going to guess what happens, and we're going to look at it. Anyway, so as well as being fun, I'm making sure that, yep, we're having fun, but we're still focusing in on the maths. So the maths for this lesson is how many edges are there in different 3D shapes? And the way that we're looking at that is by making these skeleton models. And then because of the way we've made it, we can have this plenary where we're really examining what happens. And it's fun. Another example. So this, you'll see they're playing a board game. And in this game, you win points. You might get a 1-point card or a 10-point card or a £100 card. I'm thinking of a particular board game that has money involved and buying properties, which looks a little bit like this. And some of the children might say, oh, it's like that game we play where you have to buy houses and hotels and things like that. Or they might say whatever. But here, they're playing the game and you win ones and you win 100s and you win 10s. Why not have this as a game? We've got place value counters in the classroom. So you can see the share here has got place value counters. Why not have a little game where you play rock, paper, scissors? And if you get a draw, each of you wins a 10. And if one of you wins, they win 100. And you keep track of how your score changes. You could just play that at the start of the lesson with just a few of you at the front, or between 2 teams, if you or whatever. And we can play a game like that. And then we come and look at the picture, having understood what's working. And then we say, well, what's the maths that's going on here? Or I do it differently. We teach the lesson. We teach how to find 1 more, 10 more, and 100 more. And then as part of our practice, we come up with a simple game where you can either win 1 or 10 or 100, and you keep track of how your score changes. Lesson flow, just as one thing I will point out is that I've got 2 lessons here. This is lesson 3 and this is lesson 4. Lesson 3 here is looking at number lines with mixed numbers, and I will say that this is counting up. So I'm looking at the share here, and I know what I need my class to be really good at for this lesson is counting up in fifths. It doesn't actually, I've got a number line here, 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5, or 1 whole. and I need them to be good at that. And actually, that lesson will practice that. That lesson will practice that. The next lesson doesn't talk about this, but why not start with it? So I'm looking at this, and this lesson involves filling up water containers, and you can see that these are filling up 1 litre water containers. I think that would be a good thing to do with a class. So I could have a water container in front of the class and maybe a watering can, and I fill it up, and perhaps it's marked in tenths, so I've marked it in tenths, and we count 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4 as a class. We're not just charting the count, we're chanting as the water rises, which now, as a teacher, I can generate the theatre of that seeming much more fun than it actually is. I mean, on the one hand, it's just a water container filling up, but counting exactly when it goes up past the marks, I think is a really good way of bringing that bit to life. And then once we've done that, what I'm doing with that is I'm linking our previous learning, which is counting up in fractions, and then we go into our lesson today and say, look, yesterday's learning is going to help us with today's learning because Olivia has been doing something similar. Does she count in tenths? Let's have a look at the measuring equipment that she's used there. No, that's not tenths. What's that counting up in? One, is it fifths? 1/5, 2/5, 3/5? No, and so on and so on. But actually, I know that it's based on the previous day. So I've got options to drop in some of that bits of pre-teaching and pre-learning from previous lessons as we go through that. So that's just a few ideas of the different options. So the final one I'm going to mention is going back to what I'm going to call a typical lesson. So this lesson is about column subtraction. And actually, it's about tricky column subtraction where I have to exchange across columns. And the share models each stage of that quite carefully. However, I think I might have to front load this lesson with just getting good at the method. And I wonder if in this lesson, Olivia and Aki climbing up the steps to the top of the tower, is that a distractor? So what I'm going to think to myself is, do you know what? At the start, I'm just going to front load my lesson completely with here's the method, here's the method, here's the method. It's a lesson about getting really good at the method. And at the end of the lesson, I'm going to say, do you know what? We forgot to do our discover today. Let's have a look at our discover task. Is that related to what we learned today? Because actually, looking at Olivia and understanding why Olivia and Aki's problem is to do with subtraction isn't immediately obvious. And I want them to be able to isolate some of that thinking and say, okay, well, look, let's get to the end of the lesson. We've got really good at subtraction. We've got really good at this written method. Is the written method a really good way of solving this problem? Is it applicable to this problem? Is there another way of solving the problem? Let's compare some different methods. Now that we've got good at the method, so from a teacher point of view, one option I've also got is that I might not always start every single lesson with a discover. They're certainly written that way to generate the curiosity, but there is the flexibility to think, do you know what, today I'm going to do it slightly differently. So that was just me with a few ideas of the different things that I can do as a teacher that bring it to life in my class, that's got bits of fun, that's got thinks carefully about the learning. I'll go back to the idea of looking at are there certain children that I want to pre-teach a little bit? Do I want to make sure there's equipment out on the tables before? How do I want to flow between the discover and the share? How do I want to get the questions to work, and so on and so on? All of those options are there. So thanks very much for that. Hopefully that linked in with some of what Tony was saying at the start as well. I'll just stop sharing there.
Oh, thanks so much, Tony and Josh, for that really, really interesting presentation. I loved specifically like those sort of real classroom examples and how to engage children. I thought it was just so interesting. We haven't actually received any questions from the audience today. Oh, no, one's just popped in right in the nick of time. So a question from Amira is, how long in average does the discover and share part take?
Yeah, great question. Question that gets asked quite a bit. I think for us, when we first put together the Power Math sequence, it was 15 to 20 minutes in total, okay, giving an opportunity for children to discuss and think about it and then share, because you kind of want, everyone's a bit different. So clearly some of the ones that Josh spoke about, you might want to spend a bit longer, and some you might want to get into a bit quicker, but 15 to 20 minutes is roughly a timescale. But again, I'd hate to say that every single share section requires, every single discover and share requires the same. So just bear that in mind. But that's a rough guide if you wanted a rough guide. Josh, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, and I think that one of the bits of feedback I get from teachers is actually their class really enjoy Discover, and the teachers that bring it to life. It doesn't have to be all singing or dancing, but the teachers that allow their children to really get into the picture, to talk about what's going on, to talk about their own thoughts. They say that on the whole, that really positive feedback about the Discover part of the lesson. So I'd hesitate to say race through it, but I think there are days when actually you want to keep it quite punchy, and you just have to sort of judge it by what I guess the question always is exactly what do I want my children to learn today, and what are they going to come away from this with clarity about what they've learned. So Tony mentioned the word clarity earlier, and he says that's the watchword, and particularly as they get older, but also with the younger ones. And Tony said this to me way years ago, is that what they're all craving is clarity. They want to be like, yep, I completely get what's going on. Now let me do some thinking with that. It's not, and so I think if you, whatever's going to allow them to have that. If it goes on too long, they'll either get distracted or they'll think, "Oh, I thought I understood, and now I don't." So yeah.
That's great, thanks. Actually, Ayan has asked a question that kind of ties in with that. So could the discover part be used as a starter?
Yeah, interest. Yeah, it's again another good question. I suppose what is meant by a starter. So I think if I was thinking of a starter, main, and a plenary in terms of the old 3-part lesson, I would probably see the Discover as a starter in that respect. But if in terms of, I think starter often now is seen as an opportunity to activate learning maybe, and just like quick questions, etc. So I suppose it's what's meant by that definition of a starter. But for me, I think the start of the lesson is that discover and share part of it, in terms of for him to start thinking about I suppose it depends on the definition of a start. If you want a quick 2-3 minute starter, then probably it's not that. But if you want it to be, at the start of the learning for this lesson, then I do see it as that. Josh, I don't know, again, two perspectives on this.
Yeah, what Tony said, I think I remember when we first designed it and the team from Beijing were with us, they tended to their first work with their students in Beijing was that they start with the problem straight away. So their thought is, I want the students to come to my lesson armed with all of the knowledge of all of the maths they've learned previously, not just what they learned yesterday, not just what they did as a practice 5 minutes beforehand, but everything, and that they bring everything with them to the table. So you could launch straight in with the Discover, or you could do some more number work. I think it's flexible.
Thanks both. Yeah, they were really great questions. So thank you very much for those. I just want to sort of let everyone know that obviously this webinar covered Discover and Share, and on the 30th of January, we are also hosting another webinar with Tony and Josh, which is the Think Together section. So please do sign up for that if you're interested. If you have any further questions following today's session, then also please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. You will receive an email from us afterwards, and I have sort of put in the chat, but just as a reminder, again, this session has been recorded. So the recording will be available on ALP for Power Maths current users in the classroom support area under the pedagogy drop-down. But it's also going to be uploaded to YouTube once it's ready. So keep an eye out for that. And just thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Tony and Josh. That was fabulous. So thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for turning up. Good evening.
Thank you. Yes, have a good evening. Thank you.